Hey, everybody. So today we're going to start talking about introduction to research, one of the key themes of Unit 1. This is a really long PowerPoint that I'm going to be splitting up into 3 days worth of lectures. So we'll cover the first part of this today. Um, and one of the big questions that we're going to try to answer, and it's sort of a rhetorical question, why do we need psychological science? So we'll first off start talking about some of the limitations. Eventually, we'll move into some of the strengths of psychological science, and then we'll finish up talking about scientific method. Something that all of you are at least somewhat familiar with. But first off, let's start off with the limitations. So, isn't it all just common sense? A lot you'll learn that there's so much content that we'll be covering this semester, but so much of it's common sense. Think back to the first day when we were talking about structuralism, functionalism. A lot of these terms, they kind of already define themselves. Like you're talking about the structure of the mind whenever you're talking about structuralism. Function, you're talking about, the function of the brain whenever you're talking about functionalism. Stuff like that. So, first thing we'll talk about intuition. Um, Perceiving order in random events. A lot of things that we'll do, we'll try to see patterns with. All right. So you'll see down here in my notes it says, we are prone to perceive patterns. There's just something about humans that anytime we see things, we like to try to see a pattern. So we're almost sort of like manifesting in ourselves. So one limitation to psychological science is perceiving order in random events. Sometimes things are just simply random. Like that's it. So you see here on the slide that it's talking about intuition, so the effortless, immediate, automatic feeling or thought. So it's often our intuition to see patterns. Um, so think about one of the most common examples that's used with this is like flipping a coin. All right. So if you were to flip a quarter 10 times, and let's say that 7 times you land on heads. Well, you're like, oh, okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Maybe the head side's more weighted or something like that. No, it's not. There's no pattern there. It's completely random. You're just as likely to flip a quarter 10 times and it land on tails all 10 times. There's not really a pattern there. It's completely random. All right, so that's first limitation to psychological science, perceiving order in random events. Some things are just random. That's just the way that it is. The next one, slide 5, hindsight bias. All right, so the tendency to believe after learning an outcome that you could have foreseen it. All right, so a lot of people will call this the I knew it all along phenomenon. Okay, your favorite sports team's playing a really important game. All right, say it's the NFL playoffs, something like that. It's really tight the whole time. Both teams are going back and forth, but ultimately your team comes out on top. Throughout the whole watching experience, you're stressed out. You at no point actually thought that everything was sewn up and your team was going to win. But once they pull it out at the end, I knew we were going to win. I knew we were going to pull it out. That's the hindsight bias right there. All right, the I knew it all along phenomenon. All right, so once again, hindsight. You know, people will say hindsight is 2020. You can look back on things and say, well, obviously it's going to be like that. That's hindsight bias. Okay, pretty straightforward. Next one, confirmation bias. Okay, so another good example for this would be, all right, you're arguing politics with somebody. Okay, um, and somebody makes a claim that you don't know if it's factual or not. So you immediately go to Google, search some similar wording of it up. You are looking for something to prove this person wrong. Okay. You're seeking confirmation. That's called confirmation bias. It's the tendency to search for information that will support whatever preconception you have on it. Okay. So you're trying to find evidence to back up your claim. All right. You're not trying to find, the actual answer to, I don't know, some random thing that you're arguing, online with somebody. You're seeking to find information that supports your viewpoint. All right. So that's why I say that this is very common in arguing about politics. You're searching for information that supports your preconceptions of whatever it is you're arguing about or talking about. You're trying to ignore anything that, is actually going to point out that you're wrong about it. So that's confirmation bias. All right. Overconfidence. Once again, like I said, overconfidence, it's pretty straightforward. If you're overconfident, you are more confident than you are correct. Okay. So you're overestimating how accurate your beliefs, your judgments, or your stances are. Okay. So thinking that we know more than we actually do. All right. So real quick, we'll watch this video. It's from Brain Games, which we'll watch periodically.
Don't believe your brain is overconfident? Deception specialist Apollo Robbins is hitting the streets with a game designed to prove you wrong.
Want to play with a game with you real quick?
Apollo is going to ask people on the street some trivia questions, and you can play along at home. You don't have to know the exact answer to each of the questions, but just give a range that you're completely confident encompasses the answer. For instance, if I ask you how many continents there are, and you're not sure of the answer, but you think it's around 7, all you have to do is come up with a range of numbers that you're confident includes the right answer, like 4 to 12. Got it?
Okay.
Ready for the first one? I guarantee it's harder than you think. This is the Bible. How many books make up the Old Testament? Remember, all you have to do is pick a range. Are you feeling pretty confident in your answer? Because we're pretty confident you just got it wrong.
The number of books in the Old Testament. It's a range.
10.
So we're going to say 10 books in the Old Testament. And the high number there could possibly be 15.
7.
7, okay. And how high would you go?
25.
What do you think? Do you have your range? The answer is 39.
It's actually 39 books in the Old Testament.
All you had to do was give a range that could, without a doubt, include that number. Not so easy, is it? Let's try another. How many countries are in Africa?
The number of countries in Africa.
17.
17. What's your high answer?
30.
30.
Yes.
Okay.
0.
And high.
I'll say 24.
Do you have your answer? Are you confident the correct answer fits within your range? The answer is 57. So how'd you do? Better this time?
Oh, sorry, you missed on that one.
Getting killed.
What exactly does this game have to do with overconfidence? Think about it. You likely had no idea for certain how many countries were in Africa.
So why would you limit the range you gave? Even a little bit.
Almost all of our participants gave extremely small ranges, even though they didn't have a clue. Now are you catching on? You don't need to know the answers to any of these.
Length of the Mississippi River in miles. What would you say the low is?
1.
1? Okay, I think you got part of the system down. High.
3,000.
And submit. Bingo, you got one right. See?
Yeah, I'm getting
See
this
what the
game.
system is.
Yeah.
You just need to give a big enough range. If any of these answers fell outside your ranges, that means that like 79% of our participants, you suffer from overconfidence.
So, what's the reason for such a high level of overconfidence? One possible explanation for what we call the overconfidence effect is that there's a constantly raging battle inside your brain. One way your brain can resolve this battle is to hide the fact that you're incompetent.
All right. So, like I said, we'll come back to Brain Games a lot. Little small clips throughout the course of the semester. So those 3 key things: intuition, right? Perceiving things perceiving order, in random events, trying to see patterns that maybe aren't there. Hindsight bias, confirmation bias, and then ultimately overconfidence. These are all things that are limitations to psychological science. All right. So what are the strengths here? All right. Well, first off, there are three basic attitudes that help make modern science possible. We could be talking about biology, we could be talking about chemistry. In this case, we're talking about psychological science. So these three key things: one, being curious, all right? So putting things to the test, all right? Being curious. Number two, skepticism. So having a healthy amount of skepticism means, you're questioning things. All right, so it says right here, you're sifting reality from fantasy. um that requires a healthy amount of skepticism. All right, you want to make sure to not be too cynical, right? You don't want to doubt everything, but you also don't want to be too gullible. You don't want to believe everything. All right, so you'll see right here that they give you some specific examples here. So this one says, do our facial expressions and body postures affect how we actually feel? Do parental behaviors determine children's sexual orientation or not? Um, so you've got curiosity, you've got skepticism, and then lastly, you've got humility, the ability to admit that you were wrong. So researchers have to be willing to be surprised, to look at the data and say, no, we were wrong about this. So being humble, people and other animals don't always behave as our ideas and beliefs would expect. Sometimes that's just, the way that it is. All right. Critical thinking. All right. So thinking that does not blindly accept arguments and conclusions. So it's thinking that looks at the source, discerns the hidden bias, evaluates evidence, assesses conclusions. All right. So being able to think critically, this is a cross curricular tool, right? Critical thinking is a key thing in social studies. It's a key thing in science. It's especially a key thing in a social science such as psychology. All right. And then down here we'll get into the scientific method. I'm not going to go over each step of the scientific method with you all. It's also not something that like you're going to be tested on or anything. But it is important to see the lap over here between more traditional science fields and psychological science, psychology. Okay. So, what makes something a science? Okay. So, you got to use the scientific method, step by step process. It's got anywhere between 7 to 9 steps, depending on what, graph you're looking at or what specific example of the scientific method you're looking at. So you're testing relationships between or among variables. All right. So in the coming slides, we'll talk more about dependent and independent variables, things like that. So as you can see here in psychology, these variables include the behavior and mental processes of human and non-human animals, because like we talked about on day one, studying the behavior and mental processes, that is the definition of psychology. All right. So psychologists use psychologists use the scientific method to support their scientific attitude. All right. It's a self-correcting process. You're observing things, you're analyzing data, you're evaluating ideas. You have to, put forth a hypothesis. Think about, these three things right here, right? You're being curious, you're being skeptical, and then you're being humble. You're looking at the data and saying, I was wrong on this. All right. So, theory, all right. Theories are not just like a mere guess. All right. So, if you know the first step in the scientific method, it's to make a hypothesis. All right. Hypothesis, which we'll get more into on the next slide, in theory are similar, but they're not the exact same. Okay. And that's important to take note of. And on the next slide, I will specifically break down the difference between a theory and a hypothesis. All right. So theories are generally highly researched, rigorously tested ideas. They're not just some completely random thing. All right. So if we observe over and over, for instance, that a classmate who sleeps at least 8 hours a night is usually getting more answers right, we can form a principle or a theory that sleep must improve memory. That's a theory. Okay. Now we can take that theory and then form a hypothesis. Okay. So a hypothesis is a statement of relationship between or among variables. So going back to that sleep example, we could make a hypothesis that says Our hypothesis might be that when sleep deprived, when not getting at least, say, 8 hours of sleep, people will remember less from the day before. So we're taking that theory of people who get plenty of sleep tend to get more answers right. We're making a principle, we're forming a theory that sleep must improve memory. Hypothesis here, we're looking at the data and we're saying that if people don't get enough sleep, then they're going to remember less from the day before. Okay. So typically those variables include some form of behavior or mental processes. So a theory is, once again, to recap, using our observations to explain behavior. Okay. A hypothesis is to predict behavior and then being able to test it and back it up. Either prove that your hypothesis is correct or incorrect, and then look at the data and explain why or why not. Okay. All right. So speaking of variables, all right, variables are factors that in a study can be changed. Okay. So we're going to talk about dependent and independent variables in the coming slides. But in research, a variable can be manipulated, it can be controlled, or it can be measured. All right. So these are in bold for a reason. Make sure you get that down. All right. Manipulated, controlled, or measured. Variables can be in any of those three things. All right. So independent variable. So if you're conducting an experiment, the factor that is manipulated, the variable whose effect is being studied, that is the independent variable. Okay. So it's only going to be given to the experimental group. Okay. Independent variable in an experiment, this is the factor that's manipulated. It's going to be, think about placebos, right? Giving certain test subjects let's say an anxiety reducing medication, and then other people a sugar tablet, right? So you're looking at a specific study or an experiment, and then the factor that's manipulated, that's the independent variable. Okay. Dependent variable, this is something that can be measured in both groups. Okay. So in an experiment, the outcome that's measured, the variable that may change when the independent variable is manipulated. All right. And just a key exam tip, independent and dependent variables is one of those single most likely concepts that you'll see be tested on the exam. So being able to differentiate between what an independent and dependent variable is critical. Okay. Critical to experiments. And you'll probably look and see more in the reading, the textbook reading in your field guide, more about independent and dependent variables. Like I said, we've got so much content to cover. I'm kind of just giving you surface level stuff, and then you're going to supplement that with textbook reading, making your flashcards, doing your progress check on AP Classroom, which I'll assign soon, and doing the field guides. Okay. So, in the next slide, we'll watch a clip from Mythbusters, and we're going to try to figure out what the research question is, what's the hypothesis, what's the independent and dependent variables. So while we're watching this video right here, which is not super long, it's 2 minutes, think about those things. What's the research question that they're posing? What's the hypothesis that they're putting forward? And then what are the independent and dependent variables? Okay, so look for those things while we watch this video here.
Remember, it's the dimples on a golf ball that cut down its drag and make it fly further. So by covering the clay with these,
that's one dimpled car. If ever there was a car that looked like a golf ball, this is it.
It might make the car more aerodynamic.
This is by far one of the stranger things we've ever built. And to my mind, actually one of the most beautiful, and not aesthetically either. I mean, to me, the beauty here is that we've taken the phrase golf ball-like effect on the car to the furthest possible point. No one can accuse us of not going far enough. Is this treatment going to translate to better fuel efficiency? I really don't think so.
Will those dimples make a dent in the fuel consumption?
9,450 grams. That's our start weight.
Well, by now you know the drill.
Main tank solenoid is on. Let's go, dimple car!
But despite 5 runs at 65 miles per hour, the clay catastrophe never comes. So it's over to Adam.
8,972 grams. All right. Time to do a little math.
What'd you get?
Okay. The clay car with no dimples was 26 miles per gallon and change. The dimpled car, 29.65 miles to the gallon. There is a golf ball like that.
I feel like eating my beret, but I'm not gonna.
That's awesome. We totally didn't expect that result.
Okay. So, does adding dimples to a car increase its gas mileage? All right. So, the hypothesis here was adding dimples to a car, like what a golf ball has, will this make a car more aerodynamic and therefore increase the gas mileage? That's the hypothesis. Okay. So, the dependent variable is the gas mileage. Okay. The independent variable is whether the car had dimples or not. All right. So, to recap, this is the theory. Does adding dimples to a car increase its gas mileage? The hypothesis is adding dimples to a car will make it more aerodynamic and increase the gas mileage. So, theory, hypothesis, the independent variable, what was manipulated, is whether the car had dimples or not. All right, the independent variable is the gas mileage. All right. So we'll pick back up here tomorrow. I suspect that we'll probably be back in class for this. So feel free to watch the video as much as you need to. We'll pick back up here on slide 20, but make sure you take some thorough notes here. Remember, field guide, flashcards, textbook reading with your notes. These are all things that are going to be due on Friday. The progress check on AP Classroom, I need to assign for this first unit. I am probably not going to take that for a grade just because I've waited too late to tell you about it. But the progress check is a good way for you to also, not just for me, but for you to also assess yourself how much you're understanding the content. So be on the lookout for those things. But remember, Thursday vocabulary quiz, 30 questions. It'll probably be a split between matching and multiple choice questions. And then Friday, we'll have our first test. All right. I'll see you guys later. As always, message me on Remind or email me if you have any questions or concerns. All right. Have a great day.